The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, BRICS through the Indian lens, intent, impact and reform. The BRICS alliance represents significant emerging economies. For India, one of the founding members, it is a platform for economic cooperation and a means to amplify its voice in international affairs and advance development goals. What drives India's engagement with BRICS? Does it seek to reform global institutions such as the UN and World Bank? And in a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape, what role might India take in strengthening BRICS and helping to shape the changing world order? Join our live debate to explore this timely topic and share your questions with our expert panel.
Hello, I'm Humphrey Hawksley and welcome to this Democracy Forum debate where we examine critical issues often overlooked by the mainstream media and commentariat, or in today's case, a big global question from a specific angle, BRICS, through the Indian lens, intent, impact and reform. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and the wider influence among the dozens of nations known as the Global South. As BRICS tries to expand and position itself as a counterweight to Western-led institutions, India's role is pivotal and is complex, balancing power blocks and navigating with caution. And with the violent unpredictability of last month, can BRICS ever evolve as a coherent force? Does India need BRICS? Does BRICS need India? To answer this and more, we have a superb panel: Rajiv, Bhatia, Rajoli, Siddharth, Jayaprakash, Venkat, Raman, and Sania, Makna. Unfortunately, the Democracy Forum Chair, Barry Gardiner, cannot be with us today to sum up. But before we start our debate, I have the privilege of asking our President, Lord Charles Bruce, to lay out the background and the canvas of our discussion.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, which examines the challenges and opportunities facing the BRICS group in its 25th anniversary year as India takes the chair. Our topic was chosen before the United States and Israel launched their attack on Iran. And I thank the team at TDF for carrying on with the arrangements for this event and for inviting our panelists to share their views with us today. We're very grateful for their attendance, and I look forward to hearing their contributions and to the discussion that follows under the moderation of Humphrey Hawksley. Over the last few weeks, since the start of hostilities in the Persian Gulf, much speculation has been directed at the reaction of Iran's regional neighbors and trading partners. Although it is one of the 11 member states of the BRICS group, Iran's fate has not generated a unified response. Despite 4 of the 5 founding members condemning the attack, India withheld its criticism, thus confirming the widely held view that it is often difficult for the BRICS members to find a common way forward. I quote, India notably has taken a more pragmatic line, writes Irishka Pankaj, director at the New Delhi-based think tank, the Organization for Research on China and Asia, and is calling for dialogue and de-escalation rather than outright condemnation, even as Beijing appears keen to leverage the moment to question India's diplomatic positioning within BRICS. India, however, has committed its chairmanship to pursue what the Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, confirmed at the January launch event. I quote, a reinvigorated, inclusive, and effective multilateral order, and to make the BRICS commit to reformed multilateralism. But there is growing realization that BRICS, I quote, has rapidly expanded to include members with starkly different viewpoints and geopolitical goals. Conflict will force it to grapple with an uncomfortable question, as some analysts ask. Can it really build a new world order as it aspires to do without ideological alignment among its members? And commenting on the likelihood now for building a consensus, Renad Mansour, Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House, explains, I quote, Tehran is most likely hoping that the BRICS countries feel the economic impact and then take some kind of action. But none of these countries are actually going to join Iran in any war. He adds, if the group hopes to emerge as a force challenging Western influence, it will need to move beyond an economic alliance. Essentially, therefore, it is this predicament which reflects India's conundrum as it takes the helm of BRICS at such a difficult time. I quote, because it worries more about a China-led Asia than an American-led world, it is also pragmatic about its approach to reforming international rules, explains The Economist. The country wants to be a bridge to the West, not a battering ram. Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions, please pass them to the panel through the chair.
Thank you, Lord Bruce. A bridge to the West, not a battering ram. Can it really fill a new world order? Our first panelist is Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Distinguished Fellow at Gateway House, who served as Indian Ambassador to Myanmar and Mexico and as a High Commissioner to Kenya, South Africa, and Lesotho. He's headed the Indian Council on World Affairs and has been a Senior Visiting Fellow to the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore. His first book was called India in Global Affairs, and he's written two on India and Myanmar, India and Africa. So where does India sit with BRICS in this unpredictably changing world? Rajiv Bhatia, share with us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, esteemed moderator. I thank you very much, and also Lord Bruce and the Democracy Forum for this great opportunity. Let me try to answer this first question by starting from where you left. You raised the question and made the observation that, BRICS and India. I would say the world and India needs BRICS. And certainly, BRICS needs a peaceful, cooperative world. So fundamentally, looking at the topic, this is a good opportunity to define in very precise terms as to what is India's intent and approach towards BRICS. And I would like to put it across in three key points. First point is that India looks at BRICS in strategic terms. BRICS is a guarantee for a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia. This is what India stands for. India believes that unipolarity or bipolarity are not really the bedrocks of democracy. They create a huge imbalance, whereas multipolarity creates an atmosphere congenial for everybody to get involved in governance. The second point is the ideological or political dimension. One would say that by instinct, BRICS under India's leadership will try to be non-Western in approach, but definitely not anti-Western. India stands for reforming the somewhat defective international order today, but it is not working in any fashion for replacing it or abandoning it. In fact, like many, many other countries, India is extremely concerned that the recent setbacks to the rules-based order is a cause of widespread instability in the world. And the third dimension of India's approach towards BRICS very much relates to a special focus on the intra-BRICS cooperation. BRICS is about reform of the multilateral system. There is consistently a focus on reform of the UN, WHO, WTO, and other institutions. And then secondly, very much on the economic side, the focus must be on how to increase trade, investment, and supply chain relationships among the BRICS members. And finally, I think it's also important to remember that the third goal is to promote cultural cooperation and the people-to-people connect. So in effect, the plan is and the approach is to create what the countries call the BRICS spirit. This spirit means basically that there is mutual respect, there is deep interest in peace and cooperation, and also this is the time for running a kind of a dignified foreign policy for all. Multipolarity, of course, does not mean that everybody is equal. There are different poles with a symmetrical power base. But if there are several poles of power, then BRICS feels that the emerging economies and the developing nations can be depended upon to look after their interests better. My final point, sir, is that while all this is true, the harsh realities of the world also must be appreciated. Today, BRICS is in distress because three of its members, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran, are engaged in one way or another with a very serious, concerning conflict in the Gulf. As you know, Iran on one side, UAE and Saudi Arabia on the other side, essentially in the camp of US and Israel. And therefore, India, as the present chairman of BRICS, has been trying but has not succeeded so far in encouraging BRICS to come up with a common joint statement on this issue. So I'll stop here and say that there's a lot of possibilities about this institution. Let's see how it pans out.
Ambassador Bhatia, thank you very much for that. And can I just clarify a point? Because we heard from Lord Charles Bruce's question about can it really fill a new world order? You spoke about the reform of the international order, which is a different element, isn't it?
Yes, I think reform basically means that nobody is talking about abandoning the present multilateral system. This system was created at a time when there was a huge catastrophe in the world. I'm referring to the Second World War. And therefore, we have to incrementally work for the reforming the system, not replacing or supplanting it by something else.
And during the generation that BRICS has been evolving, it's much bigger now than when it started. How much pushback or unnecessary pushback has there been from the Western-led institutions in the reform of the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and all that sort of thing?
Well, that's a very good point you are making. There has been a pushback, and I think if we look at the entire history of BRICS, which is now spread to 2 decades, the progress has been fairly unsatisfactory. It has been small. Certainly, there have been some changes in the IMF quotas meant for the emerging economies. There's been a great deal of talk about reforming the UN, particularly UN Security Council, but on ground there has been no progress.
Nothing's happened, has it?
Right, except that the issue remains on the global agenda, which is a cause of some solace to the BRICS nations.
Yeah. And then to what extent, given that the initiatives for reform that are coming from BRICS and other institutions are being blocked in a way, to what extent is the West responsible for the breakdown of its own order?
Well, I mean, the blockage or the blocking comes from multiple quarters. I think if we are talking particularly of the UN reform or the UN Security Council reform, which are very important to the three of the four founder countries, that
Yes.
is, or three of the five founder countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, they come partly from within. I must be candid and honest to point that out, because over the years, the other two members, Russia and China, have been very slow, have been very gradual, have been very reluctant to support the other members. But of course, the primary resistance comes from the other big powers, because European powers have been still far more sympathetic and supportive, until and unless there is a very clear consensus in the five permanent members of the UN Security Council, this file is not going to move forward.
And could I just put a question from the audience? This is with your Latin American experience on that's come in from Anand Singh Tomar. In what fundamental ways might India's 2026 BRICS presidency differ from Brazil's?
That is, again, a thought-provoking question. I think there is a similarity in the two presidencies, because both are facing a very adverse international environment. If anything, the Indian presidency is now faced with an armed conflict involving BRICS member states. This is the first time in history that is happening. So in that sense, the challenge is even bigger. But I think Indian policymakers will very much like to follow the Brazilian model. Indian leaders have gone on record saying that Brazil did a good job in leading BRICS, and therefore there would be very close consultations between Brazil and India on how to take BRICS forward.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that. Please stay with us, because we will be coming back to you on issues. We go to our next speaker now, Siddharth Jayaprakash from the Observer Research Foundation, and his research focuses on Russia's foreign policy and economy and India-Russia relations, something that's pivotal to the success of BRICS, we presume. He's a visiting fellow at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations and contributes to mainstream media in both Russia and India. So BRICS through the Indian lens, intact, impact and reform. Siddharth Jayaprakash, give us your argument.
Thank you, Mr. Hawksley. I largely agree with Ambassador Bhatia's statements. I would like to answer Mr. Tomar's question as well, that how India's leadership differs from Brazil's leadership. I strongly feel that the geopolitical scenarios have shifted a bit. We see the Trump tariffs. We see with the threat of secondary sanctions. We see that the Indian policymakers have taken cognizance of these developments, which is why the motto for this year's BRICS is strengthening resilience, innovation, cooperation, and stability. So that is one of the things that has been ideated this time. We see that there is a larger talk of more than reform, more talk of strengthening geoeconomic resilience and stability, creating, in a sense, a non-Western geoeconomic world order, which has been riddled, which with the tariffs, etc., has seen a new kind of recalibration taking place. So that's one major development we see with India's presidency. We see that there'll be, with multilateralism suffering a death blow last year, we'll see this year that there'll be larger attempts to improve multilateralism, to strengthen multilateralism, to strengthen the idea of multipolarity and strategic autonomy. We also will likely see the BRICS, the New Development Bank, and the CRA being much more involved this time. I see a greater discourse on sanctions to be revisited this year, given that sanctions have a kind of long-term implication for economies worldwide. Unlike the sanctions imposed in the past, incessant use of sanctions, in a sense, change the behavior of states. So we might see sanctions receiving a considerable impetus this time. However, even with geoeconomic priorities, India does not believe in non-Western, does not believe in creation of a BRICS currency, something Russia ideated in the past till 2024. India supports the strengthening of trade along national currencies. and the strengthening of trade architecture, which means creation of insurance companies that are strengthening insurance companies that are non-Western, creating non-Western banks, creating non-Western infrastructure, etc., which would strengthen global resilience in a way. And these things remain contingent on how the global geoeconomic dynamics shape up. Now, with the Strait of Hormuz closed, most of the BRICS countries suffer with energy disruptions, etc. The price of oil has skyrocketed. We see that the US has given waivers to purchase Russian oil and even spot oil from Russia, which means that the oil loaded on tankers can be purchased by countries. We see these developments occurring. So in this light, BRICS will take a stronger precedence this year. Of all the a lot of the agenda that India has for the BRICS this time, I see the energy security calculus will receive a greater impetus this time, along with technology, fintech, education, and medicine, etc. There is an understanding that obviously long-term projects require state impetus, financing, and monitoring, etc. So I see that the cooperation in the non-traditional segment will increase between BRICS countries. We see that even with the creation of the new development bank, we see that the loans disbursed so far have only been around $40 billion, which is a third of what the World Bank provides in a single calendar year. So a lot of work has to be done within that realm. Even with the recent strikes on Iran, we see that UAE and Iran being on loggerheads is not in the interests of BRICS. Therefore, there will be stronger emphasis laid on conflict resolution, etc. in this year's BRICS meetings. And finally, on the segment of India, Russia, and China, we see that resilience. We see that there will be a stronger interaction on strengthening resilience of supply chains, etc. I think supply chains is something that has been missing in the previous agendas. I think this time the Sustainable Development Goals and supply chains will receive greater emphasis in BRICS. Even in the past, from 2023 and 2024, it was argued that the geoeconomic quotient was missing from BRICS, where Global South received a greater impetus, where Russia ideated the term the world majority to describe that the 3/4 of the world that did not join the sanctions against Russia constitute a vast majority. So we see that Global South received a considerable attention. However, at present, geoeconomic quotient will receive a stronger impetus from in India's under India's presidency. Although it was prevalent under Brazil's presidency as well, but under the current configuration of the global economy and the energy markets, it's likely that BRICS will emphasize on the energy quotient much more. I also see that with two active wars in Ukraine and Iran in the Middle East persisting, it's likely that even the discourse on peace and other security arrangements such as counter-terrorism will receive further impetus in this year's BRICS. To sum up, I feel that this year's although BRICS has not delivered a lot of its promises, I strongly feel that this year there is going to be stronger emphasis on answering the critical geoeconomic questions. So to sum up, geoeconomics remains the quotient, the word for this year.
There's no BRICS unity on the Iran war, but also there's no Western unity on it either, is there? So when we're talking about the intent or the future of BRICS, what do you think that says?
Could you repeat the first part? I think it was not audible.
Oh, I'm sorry. This question about the BRICS unity as to what sort of unified force it is or influence it is. There's no BRICS unity on the Iran situation. We've worked that out. But also, there's no Western unity either, is there? Because Europe and the US is so. With that context, where do you think BRICS stands in this idea of its intent and impact in the future?
So I think BRICS, in a sense, by design, is an organization that functions based on flexible rules, which in a sense is not designed to deal with conflicts as such. But I think BRICS will have a streamlined uh, decision making process when it comes to the Iran war, for instance. Like we saw in the case of Western countries as well, none of them wanted to send ships to patrol the Strait of Hormuz. So we see the BRICS by design is not an organization that would deal with the security quotient. However, the BRICS has a unified response that naturally they would be against any conflict that would disrupt the global energy markets and the global supply chains. So I think that is what the statements are. The statements have been coming out in recent years.
And how does one in Washington and London, to a large degree, BRICS is seen as an anti-Western body. How would you define it?
I think the West is. I think the BRICS is defined as a non-Western body, a non-Western constellation of states with similar interests and goals, which have nothing to do with which have more to do with creating an alternative geoeconomic framework rather than challenging the West. Because the even though there is some scholars may argue that the world is shifting towards multipolarity, there remains a larger agreement that the geoeconomic order of the world is largely unipolar. By that, the Western-led geoeconomic order still continues. There's a preponderance of that. So, because of which, I strongly feel that BRICS continues to operate by design as a non-Western organization, even though with with China's threat, with China's territorial aggrandizement in the Himalayas, or China's naval posturing in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, has given a sense of the BRICS being postured as a non-anti-Western organization, even with Russia's invasion of Ukraine considered. But India and Brazil and South Africa continue to position the BRICS as a non-Western body, and the inclusion of six other states, further rejuvenated the idea that the BRICS continues to be a non-Western organization. So, from India continues to reiterate that the West is a non-Western, the BRICS is a non-Western organization.
And can I give you a question from Amit Rana, given something you mentioned in there? To what extent does the new development bank offer India a viable alternative to the World Bank for funding critical infrastructure?
That's a very interesting question, and to an extent, most of you all know the answer to that. It's that the new development bank does not answer many of India's development goals. To be blunt, I strongly feel that India's development growth trajectory has been rather inclusive of funding from the West, from itself and other countries like Russia, etc. The new development bank does not address India's growth priorities as such. As we know that the current geoeconomic order is the Western geoeconomic order is more growth-led, while BRICS by design remains development-oriented. In that context, yeah.
Sorry, just to very quickly, there's also the China Asia Infrastructure Development Bank, isn't there? So where does that slot into this conversation?
Right. Even with the presence of multiple banks and multiple financial structures, it's unlikely that it's going to offset the World Bank or the IMF or the Western Western agencies. And that's pretty much because even if you look at some of the examples of alternative financial structures, like the Chinese CIPS, which is an alternative to SWIFT, it only deals with $12 billion of transactions every year. 12 trillion, I'm sorry. But something like SWIFT takes those transactions every day. So you see that it dwarfs in comparison. So there is no comparison to what the BRICS financial mechanisms could do for India in comparison to the other Western the Western financial.
A generation or two generations away. Thank you so much for that. Please stay with us because we're going to be coming back to you. And before we go to our third speaker, we're going to just take a very short break and be back soon. Welcome back. I think we're really beginning to nail the concept of BRICS and where it stands with India, particularly at the moment. Our next speaker, Dr. Venkat Raman, professor at the Indian Institute of Management, and with him we go from Russia to China. Our panelist completed his doctoral studies at the Beijing's University School of Governments. He's recently been in the US creating a postgraduate and doctoral course at George Mason University on the China Challenge, and he's been a visiting fellow at the BRICS Center at Fudan University in Shanghai. He recently co-edited a book called Locating BRICS in the Global Order, Perspectives from the Global South. What are those perspectives? Where is BRICS and India? Venkat Raman, tell us what you know.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hawksley, and thanks to Democracy Forum for inviting me for this very, very important event. So, I will take on from where you just made your introduction with the earlier speaker. So, the lack of consensus in BRICS towards the Iran conflict and how it has emboldened critics and skeptics alike. Well, India's presidency comes at a time when the world was already entering into a very, very critical phase in January 2026 because of Trump's tariffs. But the current Iran conflict has added insult to injury. So to understand, India's position, one needs to put this year's theme in perspective. And this year's theme is, quote unquote, building for resistance, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability. So India's, stand towards BRICS has to be understood from this lens. So to begin with, Indian Premier's call of humanity first approach has to be focused. So India has made it very clear that it wants to lay down a roadmap for BRICS, which will be number one, in accordance with its strategic autonomy by pursuing multi-alignment strategy. And two, it will use this opportunity to bolster its credentials as leader of the global South. Now, how will it do so? So I will try to, put India's perspective by basically calling what I would say three pillars of India's, leadership in this year of presidency, BRICS presidency. Number one, the first pillar is India is all for economic pragmatism over ideology. So to give an example, let's take the case of how India is, spearheading and championing the cause of digital leadership. So this digital leadership, India is pushing big time to link central bank digital currencies and linking them with the UPIs across the BRICS nations. So making CBDCs, this is the central bank digital currencies and UPI interoperability, a core pillar of BRICS cooperation. India is adopting a policy of economic pragmatism. India doesn't want to create an alternative order, but it wants to create a system which will be upholding the sovereignty of the countries, and yet at the same time, it's a decentralized system. So India is, unlike China, not out there to make a big deal out of this whole de-dollarization thing. India wants to take it slow, and India doesn't want to rock the, India is going to, lead BRICS in its, by going for a policy which is non-confrontational. The second important thing where India's leadership is coming to the fore is how India has called for the health first approach. So India is offering its India stack, which is the Aadhaar and the UPI and the health stack as an open source model for other BRICS countries. So India's leadership is to further expand the BRICS Vaccine R&D Center. The BRICS Vaccine R&D Center was first proposed by South Africa, but actually it was India which operationalized this. So India is proposing linking the vaccine center with the digital public infrastructure, use digital platforms to manage vaccine distribution. So India is now keen to ensure that this center evolves from a reactive pandemic tool to a proactive digital first health infrastructure, from global South perspective. So this is the first pillar. The second pillar, is how India is batting for reformed multilateralism and sustainability, which is one of the most important themes in this year, comes out to the fore here. India is going to use the BRICS platform to voice the global South interests. So, for example, BRICS basically, the Indian Premier has, Mr. Narendra Modi, has said that BRICS is a non-West, entity and not anti-West entity. What does this mean? What it means is that India believes that in the case of sustainability, the cause of climate justice is a moral duty. So India's argument is that developed nations' climate action cannot be separated from the developmental equity, concerns of the global South. India argues that while the West measures climate change in numbers, India views it through certain values and rituals. India rejects climate mandates that would penalize growth of emerging economies. Further, India also argues for tech transfer and affordable finance so that the sustainability alternatives are adopted in a way which is within the reach of the global South. It should be accessible and affordable as well. C, India has, I have already mentioned in the beginning, that India is out there to safeguard its own interests and yet at the same time, pursue what is its multi-alignment strategy. So strategic autonomy is a third pillar. So India wants to pursue its national interests, but at the same time, it wants to deepen its ties with all the countries. It's a multi-directional strategy. So for example, the recent UN resolution was co-sponsored, condemning Iran's action against the GCC countries. And although Iran is a member of BRICS Plus, but India did not fall short of acting as a leader which is concerned about what Iran was doing in the GCC countries. Having said that, India has not fallen shy of the Indian leadership at the topmost level has reached out to the topmost Iranian leadership even during such critical times. And both the sides have been having constructive dialogue, which means that through this, although India is showing its leadership, India is co-sponsoring the resolution in the United Nations, India is also capable and confident of safeguarding its own national interests because its energy interests are very much at stake because of the current conflict. And to be fair, the results are pretty, not very satisfying, but, pretty acceptable as of now. So what I would like to conclude, is India's focus is to engineer ways in which BRICS evolves as consensus-based platform that delivers tangible development goals. India looks at BRICS as not a geopolitical alignment. It looks at it as a situational alignment where India can use its soft balancing strategy and multi-alignment strategy at the same time. So India, to conclude, looks at its role as pragmatic, its role as a pragmatic adapter in an otherwise complex world order. So I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat, Raman. That was very interesting. Could I ask you the same question that I asked Ambassador Bhatia? Is that as a non-Western organization grouping of countries and looking for reform in international institutions, the pushback against that reform from those who control those institutions, how damaging is it? How real is it?
Well, the pushback will always be there. It is always a kind of a tug of war between the status quo and the anti-status quo. But given the fact that today BRICS comprises 35% of global GDP and 45% of the global population, there is a limit to which this pushback is possible. And given the fact that we are in a world whereby economic globalization is here to stay, no matter the fragmented world order talks and all that, the world is not going to de-globalize suddenly. There is a certain degree of path dependence to the economic globalization that has taken place. And the Western interests are very much at stake when it comes to whatever is happening in this part of the world, especially India and China. So whatever India and China say, sooner or later, it might be a hesitant given, but that hesitant given has to be there sooner or later. That's how I look at it.
So could I give you a question from Ritesh Nigam on your Pacific expertise? How might India use its presence in BRIC to ensure the bloc does not become a China-led anti-Western alliance?
Well, one of the main objectives of India is actually to use BRICS as a platform to check, the China factor. So therefore, if you look at India's policy and China's policy towards BRICS, there is interesting difference. So for example, if you look at how China looks at the pace of expansion of BRICS. So China is very keen to expand BRICS as early as possible so that it can engineer a bloc which is openly rivaling the Western bloc. But India is very, very cautious. India says, no, let us wait and watch. Let us go slow. Let us not, try to get things in a hurry because of its multi-alignment strategy. So the pace of expansion. Number two, if you look at the geopolitical tone when it comes to China's stand on BRICS and India's stand on BRICS, that also is different. So therefore, China wants to steer BRICS to a pronouncedly anti-West, counter-US, and G7. But India is saying that we are non-West, but we are not anti-West. So therefore, India wants to maintain ties with both North and the South. Therefore, these are some of the differences which India has with China when it comes to operationalization of BRICS. And this year, India is going to try to give as much of a non-political push and leadership so that it is not perceived as an anti-West bloc.
And within the BRICS membership, the wider membership now, you have some anti-Western governments. You have Russia, you have Iran, you have others there, and then you have India, who's very neutral. How does BRICS divide up between being non-Western, pro-Western, and anti-Western?
Yeah, I think, that is something which is a part and parcel of international diplomacy today, isn't it? So India is a part of Quad, which actually counters China. But India is part of BRICS, which doesn't say we are against US, but it's a tacit thing. It's a tacit thing that, this is an anti-US-led West kind of a bloc. So therefore, India is, civilizationally a country which has always been very, very adept at managing contradictions. We are a polytheistic society, being a Hindu civilization. We are comfortable with Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, and so many gods and goddesses. So
we in the West,
multi-directional strategy, we sit very comfortably with that. It might look as something which is very complex for others, but it comes quite well.
That's one of managing contradiction. So, and we in the West, with this thing, either you're with us or against us, which is a US mantra, we're less good at managing those contradictions.
I believe so, because India, because of its diversity and its civilizational past. We are divided not by castes, but subcastes and communities and so many other factors. Languages. So India has, crossed along pretty well despite all the diversity. So I think unity in diversity is our strength, and that comes out of our ability to manage contradictions better than others.
I wonder how much that can seep throughout the whole of BRICS, the skill at managing contradictions. Thank you so much for that. Stay with us because I'm going to come back to this theme. Sure. Which I like very much. Our final speaker is Dr. Sania Makna from the Manav Rachna Institute of Research and Studies in Faridabad. One focus of her research is on BRICS and its impact on India and world politics. And among her recent publications, Reshaping International Relations, BRICS, India, Russia, and the Changing World Order. Through that Indian lens, Sania Makna, where is BRICS heading? Give us your predictions.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for providing this opportunity to speak here on this platform. I thank you, Democracy Forum, as well. I will be basically, I think most of the points, very great points have been covered by the great speakers already. So I am basically focusing on India's position and role, how it can strengthen BRICS, and how through strengthening BRICS, BRICS as a multilateral organization can reshape the present world order. If we see the present world order, it is more of worry, conflicts, competition, and we want a just, balanced and democratic order. So if you see India's foreign policy the strategy and foreign policy principles. They believe in multi-alignment strategy, building more cooperation, and also respecting the sovereignty and democracy also of other countries. They believe in more consensus, not in force. So when it comes to BRICS also, and this is the time when India is having the presidency of BRICS as an organization. So India is heading towards it. So it has, I think already Professor Venkat has talked about those four principles on which India is working. So in 2025 summit also, PM Modi has talked about that we are going to focus on the humanity first approach and the people centric approach. So when it comes to humanity first, that shows that we are going to avoid the wars, the conflicts. We are going to focus on the mutual cooperations, economic, social, political, and that too on a mutual consensus basis. India's vision in the BRICS basically it is leading. You can say it can be the voice for the developing countries in the BRICS as a BRICS leadership. It can be a strategic balancer between the East and the West, that is North and the South. India has a vision of reducing this gap of North and South by making BRICS as a strong economic organization. So enhancing more issue-based or development-based cooperation, which is developing its own indigenous markets, enhancing more economic cooperations among the member countries, and also extending to the global South or developing countries as well. And as I think in the previous conversations, the question was asked that whether it is anti-Western, non-Western. I would say India is always keeping a check on the Chinese expansion in the global South also, and India can act as a moderator and a balancer between that also, that India can also emerge its partnerships with other countries where China's aggressive intentions can be countered. And also India doesn't want that BRICS should be Chinese centric organization. So it should be a balanced mutual organization where everybody has a say, every member country has a say, they have a sovereignty, because India always respect these principles of sovereignty and democracy. If you see the history of Indian foreign policy also, we have always focused on peaceful partnerships, harmonious relationships with other countries. So yes, the challenge comes when the consensus has to be built in the BRICS organization, because all the three major powers have diverged interests. So I think as a leadership and as India, the role of India now becomes very important, because it can create a balance or consensus between balancing these divergent interests of all the major powers of the you can say BRICS members. Especially if you see China, it is more focused on Belt and Road Initiative and fulfilling its own national interests, and even through BRICS as well. If you see Russia, it is more focused on the Eurasian politics and anti-Western ideology. So India is more towards that. I don't want BRICS as an anti-Western kind of a organization, rather an alternative where you have alternative financial systems for the developing nations. It focuses on bringing global governance reforms in the WTO, IMF, World Bank, where it wants that emerging economies or developing nations can also have representation in the global economy and how they contribute to the global economy. And presently, if you see the energy crisis in the world right now, which is happening, I think, because of the wars as well. India, because if you see the geography of the BRICS, the diverse membership is there. If we have people, we have countries from West Asia, we have countries from Southeast Asia, we have countries from Eurasian belt, Asian belt. So that means it can be a greater economic organization, greater political organization, greater social organization, where if they balance their own, you can say, mutual differences and divergence interests and focus on more collective global, you can say, interests or the common interests, I think this organization can be a great platform for developing nations also to expand and also to create a world order which is balanced, just, equal, and democratic. Also, if countering, maintaining balance or resolving issues with China, it will enhance, I think, BRICS in a more you can say multilateral platform, where if China and India resolve their problems, border disputes or something, BRICS also becomes a platform to resolve their personal disputes also, which happened. I think the talks happened in the Kazan summit also in 2024, where China and India agreed to have you can say patrolling on their borders, line of actual control, and they have their perspectives also says that in Indian perspective, if this problems will be solved, so then BRICS can be a more unified global collaborative organization to address the global and current challenges which the world is facing right now. I conclude that it is very, very important, and also India's foreign policy of this principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that whole world is one family. That is, I think, very, very important. It's a message to the world also, and through BRICS also, it can follow this principle to make harmonious relationship among the BRICS countries, enhance more issue-based economic partnerships, and can also focus on developing emerging economies and enhance developments among the emerging economies, also fulfill its own strategic interests also, like balancing the geopolitical equation among the major powers. And also India can bridge a gap between the north and the east, which is, I think, very, very important, and east and the west, north south and south south cooperation can be enhanced. So I see BRICS as a futuristic organization, very strong, but only if the consensus among the member countries, and if their divergent interests, they are able to resolve them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sania Makna, for that. Just to clarify, for BRICS to succeed, China and India will have to forge a working relationship.
I think every member in the BRICS needs
these are the big ones, and the China-India historically is one of the key elements that is seen from the West, why India is part of the pact and all the rest of it. So will they have to forge a working relationship, or can they continue?
Definitely, sir. Definitely they have to.
And you see that happening?
If India and China balance their relationships, they focus on more common interests rather than diverge interests. And if China does not only focus on Chinese-centric organization, it focuses on the welfare of the all, because as our external affairs minister also has stated, that India is more on focusing, like making BRICS as an organization, showing BRICS potential as a organization which is helpful for the global welfare. So it should not be any one country centric, it should not be any one regional group centric, it should be, I think, mutually cooperated organization where everybody will resolve their issues and resolve the global.
In that case, I think we heard from a previous panelist that the key element is to keep open the supply chains and keep the economies running, because unlike the West, there's no founding cultural element in BRICS. It's. I'm going to ask a question from Philip Bowman that I want to open up to the whole panel. So I'm going to ask it to you first, Sania, and then we will go around the panel as we started. In this geopolitical climate, can BRICS remain a platform for cooperative multipolarity, or does it risk being drawn into the orbit of great power confrontation? A short answer to that, Sania, because you have addressed it before.
Okay, I think it's a very good question, sir. But I think, sir, if you talk about BRICS countries like Russia, China, Russia, China, Iran, and all other member countries, India as well, I think BRICS is not a country which has to be drawn back. If they, I have already mentioned, if they cooperate mutually, if they forget their differences, balance their diverse interests, and lead as a you can say, organization which have the capacity, because they are the growing economies, they have the digital leadership also, they have now developed the technology and infrastructure in such a way that they can be leading and balancing this geopolitical equations also.
All right.
And BRICS can be such organizations.
Thank you very much for that. Ambassador Bhatia, are we hearing there the confidence of youth, or can BRICS succeed with this, as Sania outlined?
I think I'll answer this while picking on your earlier comment. I think BRICS is not a platform for some kind of naked idealism. It is very much an instrument to promote multipolarity, but it cannot insulate itself from the power politics of today. I would say that BRICS has to be seen in its future in terms of three triangles. First triangle is India, Russia, and China. I think a very clear harmony and coordination among these three is absolutely essential. The second triangle is India, South Africa, and Brazil. These are among the more or less founder countries, and if they hang together, then they will ensure that the traditional inclinations of BRICS are maintained. And third triangle, of course, is Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. I think they have to find a way to come back to the original paths of peace and cooperation and lack of conflicts among the members. But finally, we should also remember, dear esteemed moderator, that BRICS is not a treaty organization. It does not have a secretariat. It is not a formal body. It is an informal grouping which is now completing 20 years. It has a future, but we should not overstate that future. It has a lot of challenges, and to the extent it can develop unity and internal coordination, and much depends on our presidency, but also, as you rightly hinted, the presidency of China, which comes next year. So at the end of the day, undoubtedly, these three triangles and maybe this duo, India and China, will determine the foreseeable future of BRICS.
Thank you. Siddharth, Jayaprakash, do you agree with Ambassador Bhatia?
I completely agree with Ambassador Bhatia. Ambassador Bhatia has summed it up pretty well by the use of triangles. I agree with the point that by design BRICS is not by design BRICS does not deal with geopolitics as such. Even after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the cooperation along BRICS resumed. Even in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, the cooperation along the BRICS resumed, even under sanctions. So, as such, I believe that the BRICS can undergo some kind of a recalibration, where the goals and the motives of BRICS can see some kind of a short recalibration, where there is more emphasis put on the geoeconomic questions such as resilient supply chains, etc. But not. But in terms of geopolitics, as Ambassador Bhatia rightly summed up, it's not an alliance as such. I mean, that flavor has been given naturally after the geopolitical shocks in 2022, and after Trump took office and threatened secondary sanctions on countries that deliberated on creating an alternative currency, etc. So I think by design, BRICS does not.
Can I just on this alternative currency element, and you mentioned SWIFT earlier in a very interesting way, is BRICS going to develop these structures for an alternate order, or does that fall to some other sort of international institution? Because you're saying it's not an alliance, it's not this. Are we going to get 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now a new SWIFT that can balance it through BRICS, or it's not for that?
I think for financial institutions to evolve, there should be a great emphasis, great impetus as such. For instance, the decisions that the gold standard and later the Bretton Woods systems were all because of some kind of a consensus in the world. The BRICS at present does not stand at an economic standpoint where it can influence the global order, even though 48% of the world's population is in the BRICS. The world largely is unipolar in terms of the geoeconomic configuration. So I think the creation of an alternative currency is not even in the ambit of BRICS to begin with, as countries have said that they want to strengthen their national currency trade. That is the meaning of an alternative geoeconomic order at present, not the construction of a new or alternative order that challenges the US dollar as such.
It's not the role of BRICS, but perhaps, Venkat, Raman, am I right that BRICS' greatest contribution will be enabling the managing of contradictions? Venkat Raman, are you muted?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So absolutely. So India's presidency this year, will see how good India is in terms of its stakeholder management. India has to basically ride through the choppy geopolitical waters as they exist today to see to it that India is managing BRICS membership, which has diverse interests within its members, and sometimes it can be contradictory as well. But then how does within BRICS and without BRICS also, how do these contradictions get managed? So India's role as a stakeholder, India's role as a bridge builder will be tested to the fore. And I think given the kind of solutions that India is already coming up with, for example, it is more pro-development. It is humanity first. It is more about how to include the ideas of equity and inclusiveness. So India is in a position to manage these contradictions well as a bridge builder. And India has, I think, greater acceptance when it, as things exist today compared to other big guys in BRICS. So I think, India has, role to play.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And Sania, Makna, BRICS through the Indian lens, intent, impact, and reform. Give us one line to take away from this debate.
So I think like I have already mentioned, the principles like that the whole world is one family. So we should not focus on West or the East, or should focus on anti-Western or non-Western. I think we should focus on more creating a balanced, just and equal world order. So I think this is one I would like to say.
Managing contradictions and balance on the equal world order. Thank you so much, everybody. Time's winged chariot attacks us, and we have to go. Rajiv, Bhatia, Siddharth, Jayaprakash, Venkat Raman, and Sania Makna. And thank you all at the Democracy Forum for making this debate happen. Our next Democracy Forum debate is at the same time at 2 p.m. London time. That is April 14th. The Iran conflict, fallout, and future. Where will we all be less than a month from now? Please join us. And until then, stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.